What really happens when passengers vanish from cruise ships in the Caribbean? And why don't crew members talk about it? Tonight, I'm revealing 10 disturbing true cruise ship mysteries from the Caribbean Sea. First-hand accounts from security officers, medical staff, and passengers who witnessed the unexplainable. And these stories will show you the dark side of luxury cruising that the industry keeps hidden. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but every account is based on real testimonies and documented incidents. You'll hear about phantom passengers caught on security footage, medical cases that defy science, and disappearances that were quietly covered up. By the end of this video, you'll know what signs to watch for and why some crew members refuse to work certain ships. If you've ever been on a cruise, let me know in the comments which story disturbed you most. Subscribe and hit the bell, because we uncover the truth behind real mysteries on this channel. Let's begin. My name is Cade, and I spent 3 years working security for Royal Caribbean before what happened on the Harmony of the Seas made me walk away from the ocean forever. People think cruise ship security is about breaking up drunk fights and finding lost wallets. And most days, that's exactly what it is. But sometimes, maybe once in a career, if you're unlucky, you run into something that doesn't fit into any incident report template. Something that makes you question whether the cameras and keycard logs and all that digital certainty we rely on actually mean anything at all. This is about one of those times, and I still don't have an explanation for it. It was March 2019, fourth night of a 7-day Eastern Caribbean cruise. We'd left Port Canaveral on Sunday, and by Wednesday we were sailing between ports. Just open water and a ship full of tourists enjoying their vacation. I was working the evening shift, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., which meant I got all the fun stuff like noise complaints and people locked out of their cabins because they'd had too many drinks at the pool bar. Around 9:30 p.m., I got a call from guest services about a disturbance complaint on Deck 9. The woman on the phone, Ellis, said a passenger in cabin 9247 was reporting that her neighbor in 9248 was behaving strangely, knocking on walls at odd hours, and she'd seen him standing in the hallway just staring at his door for 20 minutes without moving. I've handled hundreds of these calls. Usually it's nothing, or it's someone who doesn't realize cruise ship walls are thin and their neighbor can hear everything. I took the elevator up to Deck 9, found cabin 9247, and knocked. Ellis answered, and she looked genuinely rattled. She was maybe 45, traveling with her husband who was still at the comedy show. She told me the guy next door had knocked on the adjoining wall around 3 a.m. the previous night. Not loud banging, but this rhythmic tapping that went on for nearly an hour. Then tonight, she'd seen him in the hallway around 8 p.m., just standing there facing his cabin door, not moving, not acknowledging her when she said hello. She said something about him felt wrong, like he wasn't fully present. I assured her I'd check it out and asked for her husband's name so I could verify they were registered guests. Everything checked out on my tablet. Then I stepped next door to 9248 and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, identified myself as security. Nothing. I checked my tablet for the cabin assignment, and that's when things got strange. The cabin showed as unoccupied. No booking, no passenger assigned, no charges to the room. I figured there might be a system glitch, so I radioed down to the security office and asked Phoenix to run the cabin number. He came back 30 seconds later, confirming what I was seeing. 9248 had no registered guest for this sailing. I used my master key card to open the door, and the cabin was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty like it hadn't been used at all. The beds were made with that tight hospital corner fold housekeeping does on turnaround day. The bathroom had the little paper strip across the toilet seat. No luggage, no personal items, nothing. I checked the closet, under the beds, even opened the safe. Completely vacant. I stood there trying to make sense of it because Ellis had been adamant about seeing someone, and she didn't strike me as the type to make things up for attention. I went back to 9247 and told Ellis there must be some confusion because the cabin was unoccupied. She got defensive, insisting she'd seen the man multiple times. I asked her to describe him. She said he was maybe 50 years old, average height, thinning gray hair, wearing a white polo shirt and khaki shorts. Very ordinary looking, she said, except for his eyes, which she described as distant, like he was looking through things instead of at them. I wrote it all down, thanked her, and told her to call security if she noticed anything else. I should have left it at that. But something was nagging at me. So I went down to the security office and pulled up the hallway camera footage from Deck 9. We keep 72 hours of rolling footage from all public areas, and the hallway cameras capture everyone coming and going from cabins. I scrubbed through the footage from 8 p.m. when Ellis said she saw him. The hallway was empty at 7:58 p.m. Then at 8:03 p.m., there was a gap in the footage. Not static or corruption, just a jump from 8:03:17 to 8:07:42. 4.5 minutes just gone. Phoenix was sitting next to me reviewing footage from a different deck, and I asked him if he'd noticed any technical issues with the cameras. He said everything had been running clean all week. I went back further, checking the previous night around 3 a.m. when Ellis reported the wall knocking. Same thing. Gap in the footage from 3:12 a.m. to 3:16 a.m. I checked the morning, afternoon, evening. Every time there should have been activity near cabin 9248, there were these gaps. Always 3 to 5 minutes, always perfectly cutting out the time frame. Phoenix came over to look, and even he couldn't explain it. Our cameras have redundancy systems specifically to prevent this kind of data loss. They're commercial grade, meant for evidence documentation. They don't just skip. The next day I interviewed housekeeping. The attendant for that section, Maylani, had been with the company for 6 years and knew her assignment inside and out. I asked her about cabin 9248. She looked at her tablet and said she'd been cleaning it daily, same as all her cabins. I told her the cabin showed as unoccupied in our system. She seemed confused and checked again, then showed me her daily checklist. Sure enough, cabin 9248 was listed, and she'd marked it as serviced every morning. I asked her to describe what she found in the cabin each day. She paused, and I could see her trying to remember. Then she said something that made my skin prickle. She couldn't recall anything specific about that cabin. Not whether the bed had been slept in, not whether there were towels used, nothing. She cleaned 12 cabins every day and could tell me details about all of them except 9248. That afternoon, I got 2 more calls. A passenger in 9252, 4 doors down, reported seeing a man matching the same description standing in the hallway late at night. Then a couple in 9244 across the hall said they'd had a strange encounter with their neighbor, a man who'd tried to start a conversation with them but seemed to have trouble focusing. Like he kept forgetting what he was saying mid-sentence. Both reports described the same person Ellis had. Gray hair, white polo, khaki shorts, distant eyes. I took statements from all of them, and the descriptions were identical down to the detail of a small scar on his left forearm. I went back to cabin 9248 with my supervisor. We opened it together, and again it was completely empty and unused. But this time, I noticed something I'd missed before. In the bathroom, there was a disposable razor on the sink counter. Not in a wrapper, but lying there like someone had used it. My supervisor saw it too. We checked the cabin inventory, and there was no razor listed. Housekeeping doesn't leave razors out. They come in sealed amenity kits. I bagged it as evidence, though I had no idea what I was collecting evidence of. That night, I decided to stake out the hallway. I positioned myself in the stairwell with a view of cabin 9248's door. I sat there from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. when my shift ended. Nothing. The door never opened. No one came or went. But when I checked the camera footage the next morning, there was another gap at 11:47 p.m. lasting 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I'd been watching that door with my own eyes during that exact time, and I saw nothing unusual. But the cameras cut out anyway. On day 6, I filed an official incident report. My supervisor wasn't happy about it because it made us look incompetent, like we couldn't handle a simple disturbance call. But I included everything: the witness statements, the camera gaps, the razor, the housekeeping logs that didn't match our booking system. I also recommended we contact the Coast Guard when we docked in San Juan, which is protocol for any serious unexplained incident. My supervisor overruled that recommendation. He said we had no verifiable subject, no crime, no grounds for a federal maritime investigation. Technically, he was right. What was I going to report? That 4 passengers saw someone who our system said didn't exist? We docked in San Juan on day 7. I waited on the pier as passengers disembarked, watching for anyone matching the description. Thousands of people walked past me. I never saw him. After everyone was off and the turnaround crew started boarding, I went back to Deck 9 one last time. Cabin 9248 was being prepared for the next sailing. The new booking system showed a family of 4 scheduled to occupy it. I checked with housekeeping, and my Lonnie said the cabin had been empty all week as far as the physical evidence showed, but her log still indicated she'd serviced it daily. I requested the passenger manifest from guest services and asked them to cross-reference anyone matching the description who'd been on our sailing. They found no matches. I even checked employee records thinking maybe it was a crew member someone had mistaken for a passenger. Nothing. 3 weeks later, I was reassigned to port-side duties at the Miami terminal. My supervisor said it was a lateral move for career development, but I knew what it was. I'd pushed too hard on something the company wanted to forget. I spent another year with Royal Caribbean before I left the industry completely. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something obvious, or worse, that I'd seen exactly what was there and couldn't accept it. 4 independent witnesses described the same person in specific detail. Housekeeping logs showed a cabin being used. I found a physical object that shouldn't have been there. But every digital system we had, every camera and key card log and booking record, said that cabin was empty and no such person existed on that ship. I still think about Ellis sometimes, and the way she described his eyes as looking through things instead of at them. I think about those camera gaps, so perfectly timed that they eliminated any proof while leaving just enough uncertainty to make me doubt what everyone reported. Mostly I think about that razor sitting on the bathroom counter in an unoccupied cabin, and how something that definite and real could exist in a space our systems insisted was empty. I don't work on ships anymore. I took a job doing corporate security for an office building in Miami, where everything is explainable and the cameras never cut out at convenient moments. Sometimes people ask me why I left maritime security when I was good at it, and I tell them I wanted to be closer to family. That's easier than explaining that I spent 4 nights trying to document someone who wasn't there, and that the worst part wasn't the mystery itself, but the way everyone seemed willing to just move on and pretend it never happened. The ship is still sailing. Cabin 9248 is still getting booked every week. And somewhere in the company's database, there's an incident report filed by a security officer who couldn't prove what 4 people saw with their own eyes. I hope whoever stays in that cabin now sleeps better than I do. My name is Tallulah. and I'm the kind of person who plans everything down to the last detail. When I booked my first cruise to celebrate my divorce, I researched every aspect of that trip for 3 months. I chose the Carnival Vista specifically because of the reviews, mapped out my shore excursions in advance, even picked my dining times based on optimal sunset viewing from the restaurant windows. What I didn't plan for was discovering that reality itself might be more flexible than I ever imagined. And that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, but having everyone around you insist you didn't see it at all. The cruise departed from Port Canaveral on a Saturday morning in June 2018. Eastern Caribbean route, 7 days, stopping at St. Thomas, San Juan, and Grand Turk. I was traveling solo, which felt liberating after 15 years of marriage to someone who made every decision for me. This trip was supposed to be about reclaiming my independence and figuring out who I was without someone else defining me. The irony of what happened next isn't lost on me. The mandatory muster drill was scheduled for 4 p.m., an hour after we sailed. Every passenger has to attend. It's maritime law after what happened with the Costa Concordia back in 2012. They're serious about it now. I got my muster card at check-in, a bright orange piece of cardstock with my cabin number and a signed lifeboat station printed on it. Station 7B, Deck 7, starboard side aft. I tucked it into my phone case so I wouldn't lose it and headed to my cabin to unpack before the drill. At 10 minutes to 4, I made my way to Deck 7. The ship's corridors were packed with passengers wearing their orange life vests, everyone shuffling toward their assigned stations. I followed the signs for Station 7B, moving through the crowds until I reached the starboard side. That's where things got strange. There was a section of the deck cordoned off with yellow maintenance tape and orange cones, the kind you see around wet floors or construction zones. A crew member, young guy with a thick accent I couldn't quite place, was standing near the barrier redirecting people. I checked my muster card again. Station 7B. This was definitely the right location, but it was blocked off. I approached the crew member and showed him my card, explaining that this was my assigned station. He barely glanced at it before shaking his head and pointing toward the middle of the deck. He said something about a mistake with the cards and that I needed to go to Station 5B instead. I asked him why Station 7B was closed, and he got this uncomfortable expression. Like I'd asked him something I shouldn't have. He just repeated that I needed to move to Station 5B and turned away to direct other passengers. I walked toward Station 5B, but something felt wrong. I'm meticulous about these things. I'd read the entire safety information packet in my cabin. I'd looked at the deck plan. Station 7B existed. I'd seen it marked clearly on the map. Why would they print muster cards with a station they were going to close? When I got to Station 5B, the crew member there scanned my card with a handheld device and checked me in without any issue. Nobody mentioned anything about a station change or an error. I stood there with about 40 other passengers while a crew member in a white uniform explained the safety procedures, where the life vests were stored, how to put them on, what the alarm signals meant, standard stuff. But I kept looking at my muster card. Station 7B was still printed right there in black ink. I held it up to the light, wondering if maybe I'd misread it, but no. Crystal clear, 7B. After the drill ended and we were dismissed, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the card just to have documentation. I'm not sure why I felt compelled to do that, but my instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. Then I walked back toward the cordoned-off section where Station 7B should have been. The barriers were still up, but there was no crew member guarding it anymore. I ducked under the tape and walked into the restricted area. It was just a section of open deck, nothing obviously wrong with it. No construction, no damage, no reason I could see for it to be closed. There were the standard deck fixtures, railings, safety equipment lockers, life ring stations. And there, mounted on the wall, was a sign that read, Muster Station 7B, with the corresponding deck number and location code. So the station did exist. It was right there. So why had they redirected everyone? I took photos of the area with my phone, including the sign. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Another crew member, older woman with a stern expression, asked me what I was doing in a restricted area. I showed her my muster card and explained the situation. She looked at the card for a long moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It was more like concern, or maybe wariness. She told me the station had been closed for safety reasons, and I needed to leave immediately. I asked what safety reasons, and she just repeated that I needed to leave. That evening at dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked my phone to review the photos I'd taken. The picture of my muster card was fine, clear as day, showing Station 7B. But every photo I'd taken of the actual deck area came out corrupted. Not blurry or dark, but digitally corrupted with these strange pixelated artifacts and color distortions, like the files had been damaged. I tried several times to open them, closed the app, restarted my phone. Same result. The images were unusable. The next day we were at sea. No port stops. I decided to visit guest services and ask about the muster station situation. The woman behind the desk, professional and polite, looked up my information and told me my assigned station had been 5B, exactly where I'd checked in. I showed her the muster card still in my phone case. Station 7B, clear as anything. She stared at it, then typed something into her computer. She asked me to wait a moment and disappeared into a back office. When she returned, she had a supervisor with her. The supervisor examined my card carefully, front and back. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He said the card showed Station 5B. I looked at it myself. Station 5B. Printed right there where 7B had been. I felt dizzy. I insisted that it had said 7B before, that I'd taken a photo of it. But when I pulled up the photo on my phone to show them, it showed 5B in the image too. The supervisor asked if I was feeling all right, if perhaps the sun had been too strong yesterday, if I'd been drinking. His tone was gentle but condescending, like he was talking to someone who wasn't quite stable. I left guest services feeling like I was losing my mind. I went back to my cabin and tore through my suitcase, looking for the original safety packet they'd given me at embarkation. I found it and flipped to the deck plan. Station 7B wasn't on the map. The stations jumped from 6B to 8B with no 7B in between. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what had been printed on that card. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my cabin questioning my own memory, wondering if maybe I really had misread it, if the stress of the divorce had affected me more than I realized. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I got dressed and went walking around the ship, ending up on deck 7. I walked to the area where the cordon section had been. The barriers were gone. The deck looked completely normal, just like every other section. I stood there searching for the muster station 7B sign I'd seen before. It wasn't there. Instead, there was a life ring station with a standard safety placard. No muster station designation at all. I was standing there trying to process this when I heard a voice behind me. An older man, maybe 70, wearing a bathrobe over his pajamas. He asked if I was looking for Station 7B. I almost burst into tears. Yes, I said. Yes, I was. He nodded slowly, and told me not to ask about it anymore. He said he'd been on cruises before, different ships, different lines, and sometimes there were decks or sections that got strange. He said the crew knew about it but wouldn't discuss it, and passengers who pushed too hard about it tended to have problems for the rest of their cruise. He patted my shoulder and said to just enjoy the trip and forget what I'd seen. Then he walked away before I could ask him anything else. I took his advice. I didn't mention Station 7B to anyone else for the rest of the cruise. I went to my shore excursions, I ate at the restaurants, I attended the shows. I acted like everything was normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that reality had bent somehow and then snapped back, and I'd been unlucky enough to notice the seam. When I got home, I did some research. I found online forums where cruise passengers discussed strange experiences, and I wasn't alone. Several people reported similar incidents on different ships, places that seemed to exist and then didn't. Cabin numbers that changed, deck sections that appeared and disappeared. Some people theorized about dimensional overlap or temporal anomalies. Others thought it was mass hysteria or corporate cover-ups of accidents. Nobody had answers, just more questions. I never took another cruise. I'd spent thousands of dollars on that trip, and I had a future cruise credit from Carnival for a discount on my next booking, but I let it expire. My friends thought I was crazy for swearing off cruises after one trip, and I couldn't explain it to them without sounding unhinged. How do you tell someone that you watched reality edit itself, that you held physical proof in your hand and watched it transform into something else? The muster card sits in my desk drawer at home. It says Station 5B. I look at it sometimes and try to convince myself I was wrong from the start, that I really did misread it in the chaos of embarkation day. But I remember too clearly. I remember checking it multiple times, taking that photo, seeing 7B printed in black ink. I remember that crew member's face when I asked why the station was closed, the way he looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I remember the supervisor at guest services examining my card with an expression that wasn't quite surprise. What terrifies me most isn't that I might have stumbled onto something unexplainable. It's that I'll never know for sure, that I'll spend the rest of my life questioning whether I can trust my own perception. That cruise was supposed to help me find myself after my divorce, help me trust my own judgment again. Instead, it taught me that sometimes the world doesn't work the way we think it does, and the people who see the cracks are the ones everyone else thinks are broken. Have you ever experienced something on a cruise that made you question what's real? Tell me in the comments what you think happened to Station 7B. My name is Otto, and I've worked in engine rooms for 15 years across 6 different vessels. I'm Ukrainian, been sending money back to my wife and 2 daughters in Kharkiv since 2010. Working contracts that keep me at sea for 8 months at a time. The work is hard, the hours are brutal, and you're stuck below deck in heat that most people couldn't tolerate for 10 minutes. But it pays better than anything I could get back home, and my family depends on that paycheck hitting their account every month. What I'm about to tell you happened during my second contract with MSC Cruises in the summer of 2017, and it's the reason I broke my employment bond and flew home 3 weeks early, losing 2 months' salary and my placement with the company. I was assigned to the midnight shift, which runs from midnight to 8 a.m. It's the least desirable shift because you're working while passengers are sleeping and most of the ship is quiet. But I actually preferred it. Fewer supervisors breathing down your neck, less traffic in the corridors, just you and the machinery and your checklist of maintenance tasks. The engine room on a cruise ship isn't like what you see in movies. It's massive, multiple deck levels of turbines and generators and pumps, everything painted industrial white and gray, lit by fluorescent lights that buzz constantly. The noise is incredible. A constant roar that you learn to work through. And the heat is oppressive, even with ventilation systems running. My primary responsibility was monitoring the azipod propulsion systems and doing routine checks on the auxiliary generators. Every hour, I'd walk a specific route through the engine room, checking pressure gauges, temperature readouts, making notes on my tablet about anything unusual. Standard procedure, same thing every night. The route took me past a sealed storage compartment on the lowest deck level, below the main engine room floor. This compartment was labeled S7, and according to the ship's schematics, it held spare parts and emergency equipment. It wasn't climate-controlled, just a basic storage space that should have stayed at ambient temperature, maybe slightly warmer because of its location near the engine heat. On the second Tuesday of the cruise, I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds when I noticed something odd. The metal door to compartment S7 felt warm to the touch. Not burning hot, but noticeably warmer than it should have been. I checked the temperature sensor mounted near the door, and it was reading 78 degrees Fahrenheit, which was normal for that area. But the door itself felt like it had been sitting in the sun. I made a note on my tablet and continued my rounds, figuring maybe there was some heat transfer I wasn't aware of from the machinery above. The next night, same thing. I checked the compartment during my 2 a.m. rounds, and the door was even warmer. This time I looked through the small reinforced window in the door, just a 6-inch square of thick glass designed to let you see inside without opening it. The compartment was dark except for the emergency lighting, those dim red bulbs that stay on all the time. I couldn't see much, just shadows and the outlines of storage racks. But I noticed something that made me pull out my tablet and check the temperature sensor reading again. It showed 79 degrees. I had a handheld infrared thermometer in my tool belt, so I pointed it at the door. It read 218 degrees Fahrenheit. That's impossible. The sensor said 79, but my thermometer said over 200. I checked the thermometer on a nearby pipe to make sure it was working correctly, and it gave me a reading that matched the fixed sensor. The thermometer was fine, so either the door had somehow heated to over 200 degrees while the air around it stayed cool, or the fixed sensor was malfunctioning. I opened my tablet and logged a maintenance alert for the sensor, marking it as potentially faulty and recommending a technician check it during the day shift. The next morning, I came back to work at midnight, and the first thing I did was check the maintenance log. No one had responded to my alert. The day shift supervisor, Atticus, had marked it as low priority and pushed it to the following week's schedule. That annoyed me because temperature sensors in the engine room aren't low priority. They're safety equipment. But Atticus had been with MSC for 10 years and didn't like night shift workers telling him what needed attention, so I wasn't surprised. I did my 2 a.m. rounds, and when I got to compartment S7, the door was hot enough that I couldn't keep my palm on it for more than a second. My infrared thermometer read 394 degrees. At that temperature, the paint should have been blistering. The metal should have been discolored. But it looked completely normal, just felt impossibly hot. I looked through the window again, and this time I saw something that made my hands shake. There was light inside, not the red emergency lighting, but a flickering orange glow like fire coming from the back corner of the compartment. I radioed up to the duty officer and reported a possible fire in compartment S7. Within 5 minutes, I had 3 people down there with me, including Atticus, who'd been sleeping in his quarters. We opened the door, and there was nothing. No fire, no heat, no smoke. The compartment was completely normal, maybe slightly warm from the engine proximity, but nothing unusual. Atticus was furious. He accused me of filing a false emergency report, said I'd pulled him out of bed for nothing, threatened to write me up for wasting everyone's time. I showed him my thermometer readings from my tablet log. He looked at them, then checked the door himself with his own thermometer. 78 degrees. I told him I'd taken a reading of nearly 400 degrees just 10 minutes earlier. He asked if I'd been drinking, which is a serious accusation because alcohol is strictly forbidden for crew members on duty. I hadn't touched alcohol in 6 years, not since my youngest daughter was born. He took my thermometer, tested it on various surfaces, and it worked perfectly. Then he pulled out his tablet and showed me something that made my blood go cold. He'd pulled up my maintenance logs from the past 3 nights, and according to the system, I'd recorded normal temperatures for compartment S7 every single night. The alerts I'd filed about the sensor malfunction were gone, just erased like I'd never logged them. Atticus told me to finish my shift and report to his office at 8 a.m. I knew what that meant. I was going to get written up, maybe suspended, possibly terminated depending on how serious he decided to make it. I finished my rounds in a daze, barely paying attention to my checklist, just going through the motions. When I passed compartment S7 at 6 a.m. for my final check, I stopped and put my hand on the door. It was cool to the touch. I looked through the window, and everything inside looked normal. Just storage racks and equipment crates in the dim red light. But then I noticed something I'd missed before. On the floor near the back wall, there was a dark stain, like something had leaked or spilled. And in the corner where I'd seen that orange glow, there was a shadow that didn't match the light sources in the room. It was too dark, too defined, shaped almost like a person crouching. I stood there staring at it for maybe 30 seconds. And I swear it moved. Just a slight shift, like someone adjusting their position. I backed away from the door and didn't go near that compartment for the rest of my shift. At 8 a.m., I went to Atticus's office expecting to be fired. Instead, he offered me a deal. He said he'd reviewed the situation and decided I'd made an honest mistake, that the night shift isolation and engine room heat had probably affected my judgment. He said he wouldn't write me up or report it to management. But I needed to stop filing alerts about compartment S7. He said it specifically like that. Stop filing alerts about S7. Not about false alarms in general, but about that specific compartment. I asked him why, and he got this look on his face, somewhere between anger and fear. He told me some areas of the ship had maintenance issues that were being handled at the corporate level, and it wasn't my concern. I should have accepted the deal and kept my mouth shut. But I'm stubborn, and I don't like being told that safety issues aren't my concern when I'm the one working next to them 8 hours a night. That evening when I came on shift, I brought my personal phone, which was against regulations, but I didn't care anymore. During my 2 a.m. rounds, I recorded video of compartment S7. The door was hot again, my thermometer reading 312 degrees. I filmed the temperature reading, filmed the door, filmed the view through the window showing that orange glow in the corner. When I reviewed the video later, my phone had somehow corrupted the file. Not the whole video, just the parts showing the compartment. The footage of me walking through other parts of the engine room was fine, clear, and stable. But every frame that showed S7 was distorted, pixelated, sometimes just black screens with audio. The audio was strange too. You could hear the normal engine room noise, but underneath it there was this other sound, like breathing or maybe wind, and occasionally what sounded like metal scraping on metal. The next night, I decided to open the compartment during my rounds. I know that was stupid, but I needed to see what was actually inside. I needed proof of something, even if I didn't know what I was looking for. I waited until 3 a.m. when I knew no one else would be in that section. Then I used my master key to unlock compartment S7. The door was hot, but I wrapped my hand in a rag and pulled it open. The smell hit me first, burnt sugar and copper, so strong it made me gag. The compartment was normal temperature inside, but there was this heat shimmer in the air like you see over pavement in summer. The storage racks were there, the equipment crates, everything exactly where it should be. But on the floor in the back corner, there was that stain I'd seen through the window, and it was spreading while I watched. Not quickly, but definitely moving, creeping across the metal floor like liquid, even though it looked dry and dark like rust. And the smell got stronger. I heard that scraping sound again, metal on metal, coming from behind one of the storage racks. I backed out of the compartment and sealed the door, and I walked straight to the crew quarters and packed my bag. I didn't finish my shift. I didn't file a report. I went to the crew office and told them I had a family emergency and needed to disembark at the next port, which was Roatan, Honduras. They threatened to hold my last paycheck and charge me for breaking contract. I told them to keep the money. I flew home from Honduras, spent money I didn't have on a last-minute ticket. My wife was confused when I showed up 3 weeks early, and I couldn't explain it to her. How do you tell someone that you abandoned a job your family depends on because of a storage compartment that shouldn't have been hot but was? That showed normal on every official sensor, but burned your hand through a rag? That had something inside it that made a sound like breathing? I found work eventually, not on ships, but in a power plant in Poland. The pay is less, but I'm home every night. I still think about compartment S7. About Atticus's face when he told me to stop filing alerts. About that shadow in the corner that moved when I watched it. Mostly I think about the fact that the ship is still operating, still doing weekly cruises through the Caribbean. And whoever took over my shift is walking past that compartment every night at 2 a.m. What would you have done if your job asked you to ignore something dangerous? Drop your answer below. My name is Analia, and I worked as a ship photographer for 2.5 years before what happened on the Disney Dream made me quit the industry entirely. I was 24 years old, fresh out of photography school, and landing a contract with Disney Cruise Line felt like winning the lottery. The pay wasn't amazing, but the experience was incredible. Or at least, that's what I thought before I discovered that cameras sometimes capture things that shouldn't exist, and that digital files can lie in ways that make you question everything you thought you understood about reality and technology. I was hired through a third-party contractor company, which is how most cruise ship photographers work. We're not direct Disney employees. We don't get benefits or job security. But we get to work on these beautiful ships and build our portfolios. My assignment was a 7-night Bahamas cruise that departed every Saturday from Port Canaveral, stopped in Nassau, then Castaway Cay, which is Disney's private island, then back to port. Same route every week, same passenger flow, same photo opportunities. Embarkation photos, formal night portraits, character meet and greets, deck parties, all of it designed to capture memories that families would want to buy. The photo gallery was set up on Deck 4, right near the main atrium. We had digital kiosks where passengers could browse their photos, printing stations, and a sales counter where we'd upsell packages and photo books. My routine was pretty standard. I'd shoot during the day and evening, upload everything to the system overnight, then work the gallery during the next day, helping passengers find their photos and process orders. We had quotas to meet, sales targets that determined whether we got our contracts renewed. So there was always pressure to capture and sell as many photos as possible. Formal night was always our biggest sales opportunity. Passengers dressed up, the lighting was perfect, and people were willing to spend money on professional portraits. This particular cruise was in October 2016, my third month with Disney. Formal night was on day 5, a Thursday evening. I spent 4 hours that night working the portrait stations, posing families, adjusting lighting, shooting hundreds of photos. The system automatically sorted and tagged them by cabin number, using the passenger data from their key cards, so people could easily find their photos in the gallery the next day. I finished around 11 p.m. and went back to my crew cabin to download and review the files before uploading them to the main system. I always did a quality check, looking for exposure issues or shots where someone blinked, flagging the best images for the premium packages. I was scrolling through the formal night portraits when I noticed something strange in one of the family photos. It was a standard shot, parents and 2 kids in front of the backdrop, everyone smiling. But in the background, just visible at the edge of the frame, there was an elderly woman. That shouldn't have been possible. The backdrop was solid, and the portrait area was set up so that no one could walk behind the subjects during a shot. I zoomed in on the image, and the woman was clearly visible, standing about 10 feet behind the family, facing away from the camera. She was wearing a long dress, dark-colored, and her hair was white and pulled back. I checked the next photo in the sequence, taken maybe 5 seconds later of the same family. And she was there again, but in a slightly different position, like she'd moved. I thought maybe it was a reflection or some kind of lens flare. So I opened the raw files which contain all the unprocessed data from the camera sensor. She was there in those too, which meant it wasn't a processing error or corruption. I checked the metadata timestamps and confirmed that these photos were taken exactly when and where I remembered taking them. I went through the rest of the formal night photos, and she appeared in 47 different shots. Different families, different times throughout the evening, always in the background, always facing away from the camera. The next morning, I showed the images to Soleil, one of the other photographers who'd been working cruises for 5 years. She looked at them carefully, zoomed in on the woman, then asked me to pull up the order confirmations for those photos. I logged into the system and found the families who'd purchased prints from Formal Night. When we pulled up their printed photos, the woman wasn't in them. The exact same digital source files, but the printed versions showed just the families with normal backgrounds. No elderly woman, no distortion, nothing unusual at all. Soleil told me to delete the digital files that showed the woman and pretend I'd never seen them. She said it in a way that made it clear this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I asked her what she meant. And she said some photographers had noticed anomalies in their photos before, usually background irregularities or faces that didn't match any passengers on board. She said the company policy was to not discuss it with passengers, not flag it in the system, just remove the affected images and move on. I asked why, and she just shook her head and walked away. I couldn't let it go. That night after my shift, I went through my entire archive of photos from previous cruises, thousands of images dating back to my first week. I searched specifically for background anomalies, and I found them. Not in every cruise, but in at least 6 different sailings over 3 months, there were photos with the same woman. Sometimes just a glimpse of her dress or hair, sometimes her full figure, always facing away. Always in places where passengers shouldn't have been standing during the shot. I checked the printed versions of those photos in the sales records, and just like before, she didn't appear in any of the prints. I started documenting everything. I created a separate folder on my personal laptop and copied all the images that showed the woman. I organized them by date and location, noted which passengers were in the foreground, checked whether those passengers had complained or reported anything unusual. None of them had. As far as they knew, their photos were normal, and indeed the versions they received were normal. Whatever this was, it only existed in the digital files that we photographers saw, not in what got printed and delivered. I decided to do some research on the ship itself. The Disney Dream was built in 2011, relatively new in cruise ship terms, but I wanted to know if there was any history that might explain what I was seeing. I searched online forums and cruise review sites, and I found something that made my skin crawl. Starting in 2013, multiple passengers had posted about seeing an elderly woman on the ship who didn't seem to belong. Someone who appeared in hallways or public spaces and then vanished. The descriptions matched what I was seeing in my photos. White hair, long dark dress, always seen from behind or at a distance, never making direct contact with anyone. One passenger had posted a detailed account from 2015, claiming they'd tried to help this woman who seemed confused and lost. But when they approached her, she walked around a corner and disappeared. Security told them no one matching that description was registered on the cruise. Another post from early 2016 described a similar encounter near the photo gallery, of all places. The passenger said the woman had been standing near the portrait backdrop area, and when they asked if she needed help, she didn't respond. Just stood there before the passenger looked away for a moment, and she was gone. I brought all of this to my supervisor, a guy named Caleb, who managed the photography operations. I showed him the digital files, showed him how the woman appeared in dozens of photos, but never in the prints. Showed him the passenger reports I'd found online. He listened to everything, looked at all the evidence, then told me I needed to stop. He said the company was aware of some technical glitches in the photo processing system that occasionally created visual artifacts in digital files, and that's why they had quality control procedures to ensure those artifacts didn't make it into customer deliveries. I told him this wasn't a glitch, that the woman appeared consistently across multiple cameras, multiple photographers, multiple cruises. He cut me off and said very clearly that if I continued to discuss this with other crew members or mentioned it to passengers, my contract would be terminated immediately. He said I could finish my current rotation, but I needed to decide whether I wanted to continue with the company under those terms or resign. He made it sound like a choice, but it was obviously a threat. That night I couldn't sleep, so I went up to the photo gallery around 2 a.m. when it was closed and empty. I wanted to look at the portrait backdrop area in person, to see if there was something about the physical space that might explain the photos. The gallery was dark except for the emergency lighting, and the kiosks were shut down for the night. I walked over to the backdrop area and stood where families would stand during their portraits. I looked around, trying to figure out where the woman in my photos would have been standing. That's when I saw her. Not in a photo, not in a digital file, but actually standing there about 15 feet away, near the entrance to the gallery. The same white hair, the same dark dress, facing away from me toward the portrait backdrop. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was seeing. She didn't move either, just stood there completely still. I don't know how long we both stayed like that, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Then she turned slightly. Not enough for me to see her face, but enough that I could see her profile, and I saw her reflection in one of the kiosk screens. The reflection didn't match. Her back showed an elderly woman in a dark dress, but her reflection showed something else, something I still can't adequately describe. It was human-shaped, but distorted, like looking at someone through water or heat shimmer, and where her face should have been was just darkness. Not shadow, but an absence of light that seemed to pull at the surrounding space. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off her, until I reached the gallery entrance. Then I ran. I went straight to my cabin, packed everything I could fit in my suitcase, and as soon as we docked in Port Canaveral the next morning, I walked off that ship and never went back. I sent an email to the contractor company saying I was resigning effective immediately due to personal reasons. They threatened legal action for breaking my contract, said I'd lose my last paycheck, and they'd report me to other cruise lines. I told them to do whatever they wanted. I kept all the photos on my laptop, backed them up to 3 different drives. For weeks after I got home, I'd review them obsessively, zooming in on that figure, trying to understand what I'd captured. I reached out to other cruise ship photographers through online groups, asking carefully worded questions about unusual things in photos. 3 people contacted me privately and admitted they'd seen similar anomalies, always the same woman or variations of her, always in the background, always facing away. One photographer from Royal Caribbean said he'd been documenting it for 2 years and had hundreds of photos. Another from Norwegian Cruise Line said her entire crew had been replaced after they'd tried to report it to corporate. I don't work in photography anymore. I took a job doing graphic design for a marketing firm, safe and boring and landlocked. Sometimes I wonder about the photographers still working on the Disney dream, still shooting formal nights and deck parties, still uploading photos to the system and checking them before printing. I wonder if they see her in their files, if they follow the company policy to just delete and move on. If any of them have seen her standing in the gallery at 2 a.m. with a reflection that doesn't match her form. Mostly I wonder about the passengers, the families who pose for portraits and buy photo packages and take them home as souvenirs. They get the printed versions, the clean ones with no anomalies, no elderly woman in dark dresses, no distortions or impossibilities. They never know that somewhere in the ship's database, there's another version of their photo, a digital file that captured something that shouldn't be there, something that only exists in that specific medium, something that watches from backgrounds and corners while facing away. Have you ever found something disturbing in the background of your vacation photos that you can't explain? Tell me what you saw in the comments. My name is Naomi, and I've been a ship's medical officer for 19 years. I did emergency medicine in Boston for 12 years before that. Saw everything you can imagine in an ER, and I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. Burns, traumas, cardiac arrests, overdoses, psychiatric emergencies. I'd handled them all with professional detachment and proper protocols. But 6 nights on the Caribbean Princess in the summer of 2018 taught me that sometimes medicine encounters things that have no diagnosis, no treatment pathway, and no rational explanation. What happened challenged everything I understood about human physiology and made me request a transfer to Alaska routes, where I've worked ever since. I joined Princess Cruises in 2015 because the pay was good, and it helped me tackle the student loan debt that was crushing me. Ship medical officers make decent money, and the contracts are structured so you work hard for months, then get extended time off. The medical bay on a cruise ship isn't a hospital. It's more like an urgent care clinic with some emergency capabilities. We can stabilize patients and provide basic treatment. But anything serious requires evacuation to a shore facility. My job was to handle the routine stuff like seasickness, minor injuries, stomach bugs, and decide when someone needed to be airlifted off the ship. The Caribbean Princess runs Southern Caribbean routes out of Barbados, stopping at islands like St. Lucia, Antigua, and St. Kitts. Beautiful destinations, generally healthy passengers, occasionally some heat exhaustion or too much drinking, but nothing complicated. We were 4 days into a 2-week cruise when I got my first call about the patient I'll call Israel, though that wasn't his real name. Patient confidentiality matters even in circumstances like these, so I've changed identifying details. But the medical facts I'm about to share are exactly as they happened and exactly as I documented them. It was 3:17 in the morning when security called the medical bay. They'd found a passenger collapsed in a hallway on deck 6, unresponsive and cold to the touch. I grabbed my emergency bag and met them there within 4 minutes. The patient was male, approximately 60 years old, lying on his side in the corridor. When I touched him to check for a pulse, his skin was ice cold despite the fact that the ship's interior temperature was maintained at 72 degrees. His lips had a blue tint. His extremities were pale, and he was barely conscious, mumbling incoherently. I checked his core temperature with a tympanic thermometer. 89.3 degrees Fahrenheit. That's severe hypothermia, the kind of reading you get from someone who's been in freezing water or exposed to winter conditions for extended periods. It makes no sense on a cruise ship in the Caribbean where the exterior temperature was probably 85 degrees even at night, and interior spaces were climate-controlled. I had security help me get him onto a stretcher, and we transported him to the medical bay. Standard protocol for hypothermia is passive rewarming for mild cases and active rewarming for severe cases. At 89 degrees, this patient was in the severe category, at risk for cardiac arrhythmias and other complications. I started him on warmed IV fluids, covered him with blankets, used heating pads on his torso and neck. His breathing was shallow and slow. His heart rate was in the low 40s, everything consistent with significant hypothermia. What wasn't consistent was how he got that way. I asked security to check his cabin and see if there was a malfunction with the air conditioning. They radioed back 20 minutes later saying his cabin temperature was normal, 73 degrees, and there was no indication of any climate control problems. I checked his medical history in our system. He was traveling alone, no pre-existing conditions noted, no medications listed, no emergency contacts in the area. I tried to talk to him, asked him what happened, where he'd been, if he felt cold. He kept saying he was trying to get warm, that his cabin was freezing, that he couldn't stop shaking even though by this point his body temperature was rising and the shaking had actually stopped. After 90 minutes of rewarming, his core temperature reached 94 degrees and he became more alert. I asked him his name, where he was from, what he remembered. He said his name was Israel. He was from Ohio, and he'd woken up in his cabin feeling colder than he'd ever felt in his life. He said he'd tried to adjust the thermostat, but it wouldn't respond, tried to pile on blankets, but they didn't help. So he'd left his cabin to find someone who could fix the temperature. He said he remembered walking down the hallway and then nothing until he woke up in the medical bay. I kept him under observation for the rest of the night. By 6 a.m., his temperature had normalized at 98.1 degrees, and his vital signs were stable. I discharged him with instructions to return if he experienced any more unusual symptoms, and I filed a report with the ship's administrative office about the incident. I noted that the hypothermia had no clear environmental cause, and recommended that maintenance do a thorough check of the cabin's HVAC system, even though security had reported it as functional. The next night at 3:17 a.m., security called again. Same patient, same location, same condition. They'd found Israel collapsed in the hallway on deck 6, same spot as before, with severe hypothermia. I couldn't believe it. I ran the same protocol, got him to the medical bay, started rewarming procedures. His core temperature was 88.7 degrees this time, even lower than the previous night. I asked him what happened, and he gave me the same story. Woke up freezing in his cabin, couldn't get warm, left to find help, then collapsed. This time I went to his cabin myself after he was stable. I brought a thermal imaging camera from our equipment locker, something we use occasionally to check for fever in multiple patients during outbreaks. I scanned his entire cabin. Everything read normal, 72 to 74 degrees throughout the space. I checked the thermostat, the air vents, under the bed, in the bathroom, everywhere. Normal temperatures. I put my hand on the walls, the floor, the furniture. Everything felt appropriate for a climate-controlled interior space. But then, Israel's roommate, who I'll call Tobias, came back to the cabin. He was Israel's brother, traveling with him on this cruise. I asked Tobias if he'd noticed anything unusual about the cabin temperature. He looked at me like I was crazy and said the room was fine, maybe even a little too warm for his preference. I asked if his brother had seemed cold at night, if he'd complained about the temperature. Tobias said Israel had been obsessed with being cold for the past 2 days, piling on blankets and sweaters, even though Tobias was comfortable in shorts and a t-shirt. I hospitalized Israel in the medical bay for observation. I couldn't discharge him if this was going to keep happening, and I needed to figure out what was causing it. I ran every test I could with our limited equipment. Blood work, EKG, chest X-ray, everything came back normal. No infection, no metabolic disorders, no cardiac issues. Nothing that would explain recurrent severe hypothermia. I consulted via satellite link with a physician at a mainland hospital, described the case, and he suggested it might be psychological. Possibly a panic disorder manifesting with physical symptoms. That didn't sit right with me because you can't fake a core temperature of 88 degrees. But I didn't have a better explanation. The third night, Israel was sleeping in one of our medical bay beds with continuous monitoring. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, his temperature alarm went off. I was at the desk maybe 15 feet away, and I watched his core temperature drop on the monitor from 98.4 to 91.6 in less than 3 minutes. That's not physiologically possible without extreme external cooling. I ran to his bed, and he was shaking violently, his skin ice cold again, his lips turning blue. The room temperature was normal. His blankets were piled on him. There was no draft, no cold source anywhere near him. I initiated aggressive rewarming while trying to understand what I was witnessing. His body was losing heat faster than any environmental factor could explain, like something was pulling the warmth out of him. I checked for any equipment malfunction, any possible exposure to coolants or chemicals, anything that could cause this. Nothing. Over the next hour, I managed to stabilize him again, but I was completely out of my depth. This wasn't medicine anymore. This was something else. The fourth night, same thing. 3:17 a.m., temperature drop, severe hypothermia. The fifth night, identical pattern. The sixth night, I decided to stay in the room with him starting at 3 a.m., watching him continuously, monitoring every vital sign, ready to intervene the second anything changed. At 3:16 a.m., he was fine, sleeping normally, temperature steady at 98.2. At 3:17, I watched the thermometer reading drop. 98, 96, 93, 90, 87. His whole body began shaking, frost actually forming on his skin in the warm room, his breath visible like we were standing outside in winter. I grabbed blankets, started the warming protocols, but I also grabbed my phone and took video. I knew no one would believe this without documentation. The video shows exactly what I saw. A patient in a climate-controlled medical room developing visible frost on his skin, while the wall thermometer behind him reads 74 degrees. I worked for 40 minutes to stabilize him, and when his temperature finally came back up, I made a decision that probably saved his life. I contacted the Coast Guard and requested an emergency medical evacuation. The ship's administration pushed back hard because medical evacuations are expensive and create significant logistical complications. But I insisted this was beyond my capability to treat, and the patient needed specialized care immediately. They authorized the evacuation, and at dawn, a helicopter took Israel off the ship to a hospital in Barbados. I never found out what happened to him after that. Patient privacy laws mean the hospital couldn't share information with me, and I had no way to follow up. But before he left, while he was lucid between episodes, he told me something that I think about constantly. He said his cabin felt cold to him because something was in there with him. Something he couldn't see but could feel. Something that wanted the warmth he had. He said when he looked in the bathroom mirror in his cabin, he could see his breath fogging the glass, even though the room should have been warm. And sometimes in the fog, shapes would appear like someone was standing behind him, even though he was alone. After Israel was evacuated, I went back to his cabin one more time. Tobias had already been moved to a different room, and maintenance was preparing to release the cabin for the next cruise's passengers. I brought my thermal camera again and did another scan. Everything measured normal, except for one spot on the bathroom wall near the mirror. It showed a cold zone, about 6 feet tall and 2 feet wide, reading 48 degrees, while everything around it was 73. I scanned it multiple times, and the reading was consistent. I reported it to maintenance and recommended the cabin be taken out of service for investigation. The ship's engineer checked the wall and found no structural issues, no pipes that could be leaking cold water, no explanation for the localized temperature drop. They recalibrated the HVAC system and put the cabin back into circulation. I requested a transfer to a different route after that cruise. Princess Cruises has Alaska sailings that I qualified for, and I wanted to work somewhere that when a patient presents with hypothermia, there's actually a logical environmental reason for it. I still have that video on my phone, frost forming on a patient's skin in a 74-degree room at exactly 3:17 in the morning. I've shown it to 3 colleagues I trust, and none of them can explain it. Medical science has no framework for spontaneous heat loss without an external cold source. No diagnosis code for whatever was happening in cabin 8152 on the Caribbean Princess that summer. I think about Israel sometimes. Wonder if the episode stopped after he left the ship, or if whatever was taking his warmth followed him home. Mostly I think about the fact that the cabin is still in use, still being booked and occupied by passengers who have no idea that something in that space can pull the heat from a human body in minutes, that can make a room feel freezing when it's climatically comfortable, that leaves cold spots visible only on thermal cameras and frost patterns that shouldn't exist. Have you ever felt inexplicably cold in a place that should have been warm? Share your experience in the comments below. My name is Promise, and I've worked as a stateroom attendant for Norwegian Cruise Line for 7 years. I'm from the Philippines, sending money home to support my 3 children and my mother, who takes care of them while I'm at sea. The work is hard, physically demanding, and the hours are long, but the income is better than anything I could earn back home. I clean 12 cabins every day, making beds with perfect hospital corners, scrubbing bathrooms until they shine, restocking towels and amenities, making sure every guest feels like they're staying in a luxury hotel. I take pride in my work, and in 7 years, I'd never had a serious complaint or incident on my record. That changed during one sailing on the Norwegian Escape in the winter of 2019. And what happened made me quit mid-contract, forfeiting my return flight ticket and losing 3 months of salary I desperately needed. The Norwegian Escape runs Eastern Caribbean routes, 7-day cruises that stop in Tortola, St. Martin, and San Juan. It's a big ship, over 4,000 passengers when fully booked, which means the stateroom attendants work constantly to keep up with the cleaning schedule. I was assigned to Deck 12, a section of about 40 cabins ranging from interior rooms to balcony suites. My routine was always the same. Start at 8 a.m. when most guests are at breakfast. Work through my assignment systematically, finish by 3 p.m., then handle evening turn-down service starting at 7 p.m. Everything was normal for the first 3 days of the cruise. I cleaned my assigned cabins, chatted briefly with guests when I encountered them. Left towel animals on the beds because families with children always love that touch. On the fourth morning, I arrived at deck 12 to start my rounds and found something odd. My cleaning cart, which I always parked and locked outside cabin 12001 at the start of the hallway, had been moved to the opposite end near cabin 2040. I thought maybe another attendant had needed to access that area and moved it, even though that would be unusual because we each have our own supplies and territory. I walked down to retrieve my cart, and when I got there, I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. The cart had been completely restocked with fresh linens, towels, and amenities, but they were arranged wrong. I'm very particular about organization because efficiency matters when you're cleaning 12 rooms in 7 hours. I keep my towels folded a specific way, my cleaning supplies in a particular order, my amenity baskets arranged so I can grab what I need without looking. Everything on this cart was in the wrong place, like someone had restocked it but didn't know my system. I checked my supply inventory on my tablet, and according to the system, I'd already logged a full restock that morning at 6:30 a.m. That was impossible because I'd been in the crew mess having breakfast at 6:30. I hadn't touched my cart yet. I figured it was a system glitch, maybe someone accidentally logged supplies under my ID number, so I made a note to mention it to my supervisor later. I reorganized my cart the way I needed it and started my cleaning routine. The next morning, the exact same thing happened. My cart was moved from where I'd left it locked at the end of my previous shift, relocated to the far end of the hallway, and restocked with supplies arranged incorrectly. This time I checked the security of my cart more carefully. I'm the only person with the key to my specific cart lock, and the lock showed no signs of being forced or picked. Whoever moved it had either picked the lock expertly or had a copy of my key, which shouldn't exist. I reported it to my supervisor, a woman named Zyla, who'd been with Norwegian for 12 years. She checked the logs and confirmed that supplies were being logged under my ID at times when I wasn't actually accessing the supply room. She suggested maybe I was forgetting that I'd restocked earlier, that the long hours and repetitive work sometimes made people lose track of their actions. I told her respectfully that I knew my own routine, that I would never forget something I did less than an hour ago. She said she'd look into it, but seemed skeptical. On the 6th morning, I decided to test something. Before leaving deck 12 at the end of my shift the previous evening, I'd marked my supplies. I used a pen to make a small dot on the corner of the top towel in each stack, positioned my amenity bottles in a specific pattern that I photographed with my phone, and I wrote down the exact number of items in each category. When I returned the next morning and found my cart moved and restocked again, I checked my marks. The towels I'd marked were gone, replaced with unmarked ones. The amenity bottles were in different positions. The item counts didn't match what I'd recorded. This meant someone was completely replacing my supplies, not just restocking what I'd used, and they were doing it overnight when the deck should have been quiet with most passengers sleeping. I checked the timestamps in the supply system, and the restock was logged at 2:47 a.m. under my ID. At 2:47 in the morning, I'd been asleep in my crew cabin 3 decks below, sharing a small room with another attendant who could verify I never left during the night. I started finding other things that bothered me. Small things at first, easy to dismiss individually, but disturbing when they accumulated. I'd find cabin do not disturb signs flipped to the makeup room side on cabins, where I knew the guests had requested privacy. I discover my master keycard sitting inside my locked cart, even though I'd been wearing it on my lanyard around my neck. Twice I found cleaning supplies inside cabins I hadn't entered yet, positioned as if I'd been working and stepped out temporarily. Then I found the notes. The first one was tucked into a stack of washcloths on my cart, a small piece of paper folded twice. When I opened it, there were 3 words written in Tagalog. Stop cleaning 12049. That's my native language, the language spoken in the Philippines. And I'd never told anyone on the ship that I spoke it. It's not in my employee file because Norwegian's working language is English, and that's all they require. My name badge doesn't indicate nationality, and I'd always been careful to speak only English at work to avoid any communication issues. The note terrified me more than the moved cart or the restocked supplies because whoever wrote it knew something personal about me that wasn't public information. I showed it to Zyla, and she asked me what language it was written in. When I told her Tagalog, she asked if many crew members spoke it. I explained that there were other Filipino crew members on the ship, maybe 15 or 20 total. But they worked in different departments, and I barely knew most of them. She took the note and said she'd investigate. But I could tell from her expression that she thought I was involved in some kind of crew drama. The second note appeared 3 days later, also in Tagalog, also tucked into my cart supplies. They know you see them. I didn't report this one because I knew how it would sound. Instead, I started documenting everything with my phone. I took photos of my cart position at the end of each shift, photographed my supply arrangements, recorded videos of myself locking the cart and checking that everything was secure. I wanted evidence that I wasn't imagining this, that someone was systematically messing with my workstation and leaving me messages. On the 10th day of the cruise, I found the 3rd note, and this one made me decide I couldn't stay on the ship any longer. It was in Tagalog again. Go home. But what frightened me wasn't the message itself. It was where I found it. It was inside my crew cabin, tucked into my pillow when I returned after my shift. My cabin was locked. My roommate had been at work in the restaurant all day, and no one except housekeeping supervisors had master access to crew quarters. I checked with my roommate, and she swore no one had entered our cabin. I asked the crew housekeeping supervisor if anyone had accessed our room, and he checked the logs showing no entry except my roommate's and mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those notes, about someone who knew I spoke Tagalog, who could access my locked cleaning cart, who could enter my locked cabin, who was telling me to stop cleaning a specific room and to go home. I thought about my children back in the Philippines, about the money they needed, about how quitting would mean financial disaster for my family. But I also thought about the fear I felt every time I approached my cart, every time I entered my cabin, every time I walked down that Deck 12 hallway. The next morning, I went to my cart, and someone had left one more item for me. It was my own master key card. The one that should have been on the lanyard around my neck, sitting in the middle of my cart on top of the towel stack. I looked down at my lanyard, and my key card was still there, still attached, still showing my employee photo and ID number. I was wearing 2 identical key cards somehow, one that had never left my possession and one that had been placed in my cart overnight. I took both key cards to Zyla and showed her. She scanned them both in the system, and they both registered as valid. Both showed my information. Both had identical access permissions. She called the IT department, and they couldn't explain it. Key cards are individually coded and registered. There shouldn't be duplicates. And even if someone copied one, the system would flag it as fraudulent. These were both showing as legitimate original cards issued to me. That afternoon, I went to the crew office and told them I needed to disembark at the next port due to a family emergency. They asked what the emergency was, and I lied. Said my mother was sick and I needed to go home to the Philippines immediately. They warned me that breaking contract meant I'd lose my final paycheck, that I'd have to pay for my own flight home, that I might be blacklisted from working with Norwegian again. I told them I understood and accepted those consequences. We docked in San Juan the next morning, and I walked off the Norwegian escape with one suitcase containing everything I owned and about $300 in my pocket. I'd been sending almost all my salary home every month, so I had almost no savings. I had to borrow money from my sister to buy a flight from San Juan to Manila, and the loan took me 8 months to pay back. I lost nearly $5,000 in wages and benefits by quitting that contract early. My family didn't understand why I'd come home. My mother was healthy, there was no emergency, and I'd given up a good job with no explanation they could accept. I couldn't tell them the truth because how do you explain that you fled because someone was moving your cleaning cart and leaving you notes? That you abandoned your income because you felt watched and threatened in ways you couldn't prove? They thought I'd had a breakdown, that the stress of being away from my children had finally overwhelmed me. I found work eventually, in a hotel in Manila, where I clean rooms for a fraction of what I made on the cruise ship. I'm home with my children now, which is worth something. But we struggle financially in ways we didn't before. I still think about those notes in Tagalog, about whoever knew my language and my cabin, and could duplicate my key card. I think about cabin 12049, the room I was warned to stop cleaning, and wonder what would have happened if I'd ignored the warnings and kept working. Mostly I think about the fact that the Norwegian escape is still sailing, still running those Eastern Caribbean routes every week, and some other stateroom attendant has been assigned to Deck 12. I wonder if they've found their cart moved and restocked with supplies arranged wrong. I wonder if they've received notes in their native language that nobody should know they speak. I wonder if they're braver than I was, or more desperate for the income, and whether they're still working there or whether they've also fled in the middle of the night from something they couldn't explain to anyone who'd believe them. Have you ever felt like you were being watched or followed at work but couldn't prove it? Drop your story in the comments. My name is Colt, and I'm 68 years old now. Retired from a career in insurance investigation that taught me to document everything and trust only what I could verify. I started taking cruises after my wife passed away in 2014, finding that the structured routine and constant activity helped with the grief that was otherwise overwhelming. Over 4 years, I took 22 cruises on various lines, always keeping detailed journals of each trip, photographing everything, maintaining records that would have made my former employers proud. I'm telling you this so you understand that I'm not the type of person who loses track of things or confuses one experience with another. What happened on the Celebrity Summit in the fall of 2018 violated everything I thought I knew about memory, time, and my own identity. I booked a 10-day cruise departing from San Juan, visiting the ABC Islands, which are Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. I chose Celebrity because I'd sailed with them twice before and appreciated their service quality in the ship's layout. I'm a creature of habit, so I requested the same cabin category I always book, a veranda stateroom on Deck 8. And I made dining reservations for the second seating at 8 p.m. every night. I packed my journal, my camera, my medications, everything organized in my suitcase exactly the way I always pack. The departure was scheduled for Saturday, October 13th. The cruise itself was pleasant for the first few days. I attended the Welcome Aboard show, had dinner at the main dining room, participated in a trivia competition where my team came in second place. I wrote about all of this in my journal each evening before bed, noting the date, the ports we'd visit, observations about my fellow passengers and the crew. On day 4, we docked in Aruba, and I took a shore excursion to the Natural Bridge and the California Lighthouse. I have photos from that day, pictures I took with my digital camera showing the landscapes and the tour group I was with. On day 5, while we were at sea between Aruba and Bonaire, I was having lunch in the Ocean View Cafe when another passenger approached my table. She was probably in her 50s, traveling with her husband, and she smiled at me like we were old friends. She asked how I'd been since the last cruise, said it was wonderful to see me again, and mentioned how much she'd enjoyed our conversations during the previous sailing. I politely told her she must have me confused with someone else, that this was only my 3rd celebrity cruise, and I didn't recall meeting her before. Her smile faded, and she looked genuinely confused. She insisted we'd been on the summit together just 2 months earlier, same route, same ship. She said we'd sat together at trivia several times, and that I'd told her about my late wife and my career in insurance. She even mentioned specific details, things that were accurate about my life, but that I'd never shared with her because I'd never met her. Her husband came over and confirmed everything she was saying, claiming they remembered me clearly from August. I explained as kindly as I could that they were mistaken, that I hadn't been on a cruise in August, that my previous celebrity sailing had been in April on a different ship. They seemed so certain, though, so I pulled out my phone and showed them my calendar. August was empty, except for some doctor's appointments and a weekend visit to see my daughter in Connecticut. I showed them my credit card statements proving I hadn't made any cruise payments in August. They looked at each other with expressions I couldn't quite read, somewhere between confusion and concern, then apologized for the mix-up and walked away. I thought about that conversation all afternoon. I went back to my cabin and reviewed my journal, checking my entries to confirm my memory. My last cruise before this one had been in June, not April like I'd told those passengers. I'd made an error, but that was understandable. It's easy to mix up months when you're traveling frequently. I checked my records more carefully and found documentation for all 22 of my previous cruises going back to 2014. Everything was accounted for. Everything matched my memories and my journals. That evening at dinner, something stranger happened. The waiter, a young man from Indonesia, greeted me by name without checking the seating chart. He asked if I wanted the same wine I'd ordered the previous time, a specific Chilean red that I did in fact enjoy. I asked him what he meant by previous time, and he said from when I'd sailed in August. I told him I wasn't on the ship in August, and he insisted he remembered serving me, that I'd sat at this same table and ordered that same wine multiple times. I went to guest services after dinner and asked to speak with someone about my booking history. The representative pulled up my account and showed me my sailing record with Celebrity. According to their system, I'd been on the summit in August 2018, departing August 11th, the exact same itinerary I was currently sailing. I stared at the screen showing the booking confirmation, the cabin number, the charges to my credit card. The cabin number was 8047, the same cabin I was staying in right now. I told the representative this was impossible, that I had my credit card statements and my personal calendar proving I was home in August. She looked uncomfortable and suggested there might be a system error, that sometimes bookings get duplicated in the database. But when I asked her to investigate, she showed me the embarkation photo from August. It was me, standing in front of the Celebrity backdrop with my boarding pass, wearing a blue polo shirt I owned, smiling at the camera. I had no memory of that photo being taken, no memory of that cruise, no memory of August at all beyond the mundane routine of being home. I returned to my cabin and went through my luggage, looking for anything that might explain this. I found my journal, the one I'd been writing in during this cruise. I flipped back through the pages to check earlier entries, and there were pages I didn't remember writing. Entries from August describing this exact ship, this exact itinerary observations about ports and passengers and activities. The handwriting was mine. The style was consistent with how I always write, but I had absolutely no recollection of writing those entries. I took photos with my phone of the August entries in my journal. Then I searched my phone's photo library. I found pictures from August that I didn't remember taking. Photos of Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, all the same locations I'd photographed on this cruise. I looked at the metadata on the files, and they showed dates in August, showed GPS coordinates matching the islands. In several photos, I could see other passengers in the background, including that couple who'd approached me at lunch. I spent most of that night sitting on my balcony trying to understand what was happening. There were two possibilities, both terrifying. Either I'd actually taken a cruise in August and had somehow lost all memory of it, or someone had elaborately fabricated evidence of a cruise I never took. Memory loss seemed more likely, but also more frightening because I'm 68 years old and dementia runs in my family. My father had Alzheimer's, and I'd watched him lose himself piece by piece over 7 years. The idea that I might be experiencing early symptoms, that I could lose months of time without knowing it, made me feel sick. The next morning, I called my daughter from the ship's phone system. I asked her what I'd been doing in August, whether she remembered talking to me or visiting. She said I'd been traveling, that I'd mentioned going on another cruise, that we'd talked on the phone a few times while I was away. I asked her if she was certain, and she said of course she was certain. She'd been worried because I'd seemed distracted during our calls. Not quite myself. I asked what I'd seemed distracted about, and she said I'd kept mentioning that the cruise felt familiar, like I'd done it all before. After that conversation, I went to the medical center and asked to speak with the ship's doctor. I explained my situation, told him I was concerned about memory loss, asked if he could evaluate me for cognitive issues. He did some basic tests, asked me questions about orientation and recall, had me perform simple tasks. He said I seemed completely lucid and oriented, that my immediate and long-term memory appeared intact. When I told him I had no memory of a cruise in August, despite extensive evidence that I'd been on this ship, he suggested stress or perhaps a dissociative episode, something that can happen after trauma like losing a spouse. I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept a psychological explanation rather than a neurological one. But the evidence kept accumulating. I met 3 more passengers who claimed to remember me from August. The sommelier in the specialty restaurant knew my wine preferences. The fitness instructor greeted me by name. Each interaction confirmed that I'd been on this ship, in these spaces, interacting with these people, just 2 months earlier. And I remembered none of it. I started comparing my August journal entries with what I was experiencing on the current cruise. The similarities were impossible to ignore. On August 15th, I'd written about attending a cooking demonstration in the afternoon. On this cruise, October 17th, I attended the same demonstration with the same chef. In August, I'd noted that trivia was postponed due to a technical issue with the sound system. On this cruise, trivia was postponed for the identical reason. In August, I'd written about a passenger who fell near the pool and required medical attention. On this cruise, a passenger fell in the exact same location. It wasn't just similar events, it was identical events happening on the same schedule, in the same sequence. Either I was experiencing the most unlikely coincidence imaginable, or something else was happening that I couldn't begin to explain. I photographed every page of my August journal entries and compared them systematically with what I was experiencing. The correlation was perfect. Everything I'd supposedly done in August was happening again now, like the cruise was repeating itself or like I was repeating it. On the last night of the cruise, I had dinner with that couple who'd first approached me, the ones who remembered me from August. I'd sought them out earlier in the day and asked if we could talk. I showed them my journal, showed them the parallel entries, asked them if they'd experienced anything unusual. They admitted that this cruise had felt strangely familiar to them too, like they were retracing steps they'd already taken. The wife said she'd had déjà vu constantly, knowing what would happen before it happened. The husband said he'd checked their records, and they'd also been on the August sailing, sitting at the same dining table, taking the same shore excursions. We talked for hours, trying to make sense of it. We wondered if something about the ship or the route created this effect, if there was some environmental factor that affected memory or perception. We considered whether we'd all been exposed to something. Carbon monoxide or some chemical that could cause shared hallucinations or memory distortion. None of our theories made sense, but the alternative, that we'd somehow experienced the same cruise twice, with only partial memory of the first time, made even less sense. When I disembarked in San Juan, I immediately went to see my personal physician in Florida. I insisted on comprehensive testing, MRI, cognitive assessment, neurological examination, everything available. The results came back normal. No signs of dementia, no brain abnormalities, no medical explanation for memory loss. My doctor suggested I see a therapist who specialized in grief counseling, thinking perhaps my wife's death was affecting me in ways I hadn't processed. I did see the therapist, had 6 sessions where I talked through everything. She helped me understand that grief can manifest in strange ways, that the mind sometimes protects itself from pain by creating gaps or confusion. But she couldn't explain the journal entries in my handwriting describing events I didn't remember. Couldn't explain the photos on my phone with metadata I couldn't fake. Couldn't explain the multiple passengers and crew members who remembered me from a cruise I insisted I never took. I still have my Celebrity Cruises loyalty account, and it still shows 2 sailings in 2018 on the Summit. One in August and one in October. I have 2 sets of embarkation photos, 2 sets of journal entries, 2 sets of photographs from the same islands taken 2 months apart. I have credit card charges for both cruises, charges I apparently authorized but only remember authorizing once. My daughter insists we talked on the phone during both sailings, that I told her similar stories about the same ports and the same activities. I haven't taken a cruise since then. I let my future cruise credit expire, stopped reading cruise reviews, avoided anything that reminded me of that experience. The uncertainty is what haunts me most. Not knowing whether I lost 2 months of my life to some neurological problem that testing can't detect, or whether something stranger happened that I'm not equipped to understand. Sometimes I pull out those 2 journals and read the parallel entries, looking for differences or clues, finding instead identical observations written in my own hand about experiences I only remember living once. What scares you more? Losing time and not knowing it? Or discovering you've lived the same experience twice? Tell me in the comments which possibility disturbs you most. My name is Cynthia, and I work as a shore excursion coordinator for Holland America Line. I spent 20 years in the Coast Guard before transitioning to civilian maritime work. So I understand ships, I understand safety protocols, and I understand chain of command. Everything in my career has been built on following procedures, maintaining order, and ensuring passenger safety through systematic operations. What happened during a tender operation in Grand Cayman in March 2017 challenged every assumption I had about how maritime operations work and made me question whether the systems we trust to keep passengers safe are as reliable as we believe them to be. The New Amsterdam was anchored off Georgetown, Grand Cayman, which is one of those ports where the water is too shallow for cruise ships to dock directly. Instead, we used tender boats, essentially large motorized lifeboats that ferry passengers from the anchored ship to the shore and back. It's a standard operation that happens dozens of times every cruise season. We have strict protocols, capacity limits, manifest checks, life jacket inspections, communication procedures between the tender and the ship. I've overseen hundreds of these operations without incident. That morning, we were running 6 tenders simultaneously, shuttling passengers ashore for their excursions and shopping time. Each tender holds a maximum of 150 passengers plus 3 crew members. We track every person boarding and departing using their key cards, which scan against the ship's manifest to ensure we know exactly who's on which tender at any given time. The system is designed to prevent anyone from getting lost or left behind, and it works through multiple redundancies. I was stationed at the tender boarding platform on Deck 3, managing the flow of passengers and coordinating with the tender captains via radio. Around 9:45 a.m., tender number 4 returned from shore with passengers who'd completed their morning excursions and were ready to come back to the ship. The tender captain, a guy named Holden who'd been with Holland America for 8 years, radioed that he was approaching with 11 passengers returning from shore. Standard procedure is that I verify the count as passengers disembark and cross-check against the manifest. The tender pulled alongside, crew secured it to the platform, and passengers started coming off. I counted as they stepped onto the ship. 1, 2, 3, continuing through to 11. Everything matched Holden's reported count. I scanned their key cards as they passed through the checkpoint, and each one registered properly in the system. The passengers headed up to the main decks, and I radioed Holden that we were clear and he could return to shore for the next pickup. About 20 minutes later, I got a call from guest services. They had a passenger at their desk asking about a problem with her key card. When they looked up her information, the system showed her as currently off the ship on a tender, but she was standing right there in front of them. The passenger's name was Sky, and she was confused because she'd just returned from shore on tender 4 about 20 minutes earlier, had scanned her card at my checkpoint, and was now back on the ship. But according to the system, she was still registered as being on a tender. I pulled up the manifest on my tablet and checked the tender 4 logs. Sky's key card showed she'd scanned off the ship onto tender 4 at 8:30 a.m., which was correct. But there was no record of her scanning back on when the tender returned. That should have been impossible because I'd personally scanned every passenger's card as they disembarked, and I specifically remembered her card reading successfully. I told guest services to manually override her status in the system and mark her as back on board, figuring it was just a technical glitch with the scanner. Then I got another call, this time from the medical center. They had a passenger who needed assistance, someone who'd apparently returned from shore feeling ill. The nurse wanted to verify the passenger's information, and when she pulled up the record, she found the same issue. The system showed the passenger as currently off ship on a tender, but he was physically in the medical bay. His name was Saint, and he'd also returned on tender 4 at the same time as Sky. I started checking more carefully. I pulled up the complete manifest for tender 4's 9:45 return trip and compared it against the system's current status for those passengers. Out of the 11 passengers who'd returned, only 9 were registered in the system as back on board. 2 passengers, Sky and Saint, showed as still being off ship despite physically being on the vessel. I went back through my scanner logs and found both of their key card reads from when they'd disembarked. The scans had been recorded on my device, but somehow hadn't synchronized with the main system. I reported the issue to my supervisor and to IT. They ran diagnostics on my scanner and found it functioning perfectly. They checked the network connection between my device and the main system, and everything was operating normally. The data should have transferred, but for those 2 specific passengers, it hadn't. ET manually corrected their status, and I continued with the tender operations, making a note to monitor for any additional issues. At 11:15, Tender 4 returned again with another group of passengers. Holden radioed that he had 13 passengers returning from shore. I counted as they disembarked. 1, 2, 3, continuing through to 13. I scanned each keycard carefully, watching my device to confirm that each scan registered. Everything appeared to work correctly. The passengers proceeded up to the main decks, and I cleared Tender 4 to return to shore. But then something happened that made my hands go cold. I was reviewing my scanner log to verify the count, and I noticed something wrong with the total. My device showed I'd scanned 11 key cards, not 13. I'd physically counted 13 people getting off the tender. I'd watched 13 passengers walk past me through the checkpoint. But my scanner had only recorded 11. I radioed Holden immediately and asked him to confirm his passenger count. He said 13, same as he'd reported. I pulled up the Tender 4 manifest for the 11:15 return trip. It listed 11 passengers by name, matching the 11 scans in my device. But I had counted 13 people. 2 passengers had somehow disembarked without their key cards being scanned, or without their presence being registered in any system. I reported this to my supervisor immediately, and within 10 minutes, I had the ship's security chief and the tender operations manager at my station. We reviewed the security camera footage from the tender platform. The video clearly showed 13 people stepping off Tender 4 and walking through my checkpoint. We could count them frame by frame on the recording. But when we tried to identify the 2 people who hadn't been scanned, we ran into a problem. Every time we focused on those 2 specific individuals in the footage, the video quality degraded. Not for the whole scene, just for those 2 people. Their faces were blurred, their clothing was indistinct, like looking at someone through frosted glass while everyone around them was perfectly clear. The security chief decided we needed to do a complete ship-wide head count to verify that everyone on board was supposed to be there. This is a massive undertaking on a ship with over 2,000 passengers and 800 crew members. But it's the protocol when there's a possibility of unauthorized persons on the vessel. We initiated the procedure, making announcements asking all passengers to return to their cabins and wait for crew to verify their presence. The head count took 4 hours and confirmed something impossible. We had 2 extra people on the ship. The total count exceeded our manifest by exactly 2 individuals. Security conducted a deck-by-deck search, trying to locate the 2 unaccounted persons, checking every public space, every crew area, every possible location someone could be. They found nothing. No one without a valid key card, no one who couldn't explain their presence, no one who seemed out of place. But those 2 people had come off Tender 4. I'd counted them. The cameras had recorded them, even if their faces weren't visible. They had to be somewhere on the ship. The security chief expanded the search, and I continued with tender operations under close supervision. Every passenger was now being scanned multiple times, verified against photo IDs, cross-checked against booking records. At 2:30 p.m., Tender 4 was scheduled to take passengers back to shore for afternoon excursions. I was processing passengers for boarding when I saw them. 2 people standing in line, a woman and a man, both appearing to be in their 40s. Both carrying beach bags like they were heading to shore. They had key cards hanging from lanyards around their necks. They were dressed appropriately for a tropical port day. They looked completely normal, except for one detail that made me freeze. I recognized them. Not from meeting them before, but from the security footage. These were the two people whose images had been distorted, the two people who disembarked at 11:15 without being scanned. I radioed security immediately, keeping my voice calm so as not to alarm the other passengers in line. I described the two people and their location. Security arrived within 90 seconds, approaching the couple politely and asking to verify their key cards. The couple seemed confused, but cooperative, handing over their cards. The security officer scanned them, and both cards read as valid. Sky and Saint, the same two passengers who'd had the scanning issues earlier that morning. But that was impossible. I pulled up my tablet and checked their current status. The system showed Sky and Saint as being in their cabin on Deck 9. I radioed the deck steward for that section and asked him to physically verify whether Sky and Saint were in their cabin. He called back 3 minutes later, confirming that yes, both passengers were in their cabin. He'd just spoken with them through the door. They were resting and didn't want to be disturbed. So Sky and Saint were simultaneously in their cabin on Deck 9 and standing in line at the tender platform on Deck 3. The security officer standing next to them could see them. I could see them. The other passengers in line could see them. But according to the ship's systems and according to the deck steward, they were also in their cabin. The security officer asked the couple in front of him to confirm their names and cabin numbers. The woman said her name was Sky, cabin 9047. The man said his name was Saint, same cabin. The exact same information as the passengers who were supposedly in their cabin. The security officer asked them to wait and radioed for backup. He wanted to escort them somewhere secure while we figured out what was happening. But when he turned back to speak with them, they were gone. Not walked away, not moved through the crowd, just gone. The space where they'd been standing was empty. The passengers who'd been in line behind them were now standing closer together, filling the gap. And when I asked them if they'd seen where the couple went, they looked at me, confused. They said there hadn't been anyone in that spot, that I was mistaken about seeing people there. I checked the security footage from the tender platform camera covering that exact time and location. The video showed passengers in line, showed me at my station, showed the security officer arriving and standing there. But it didn't show Sky and Saint. The space where I'd seen them standing was empty in the recording, even though I'd been looking directly at them with my own eyes not 5 minutes earlier. My supervisor pulled me off tender duty and sent me to the medical center for evaluation. They thought maybe I was experiencing some kind of stress reaction or hallucination. The ship's doctor checked me thoroughly, asked about my sleep, my mental state, whether I'd been drinking or taking any medications. Everything came back normal. I wasn't sick, wasn't impaired, wasn't suffering from any condition that would cause me to see things that weren't there. But the security officer who'd approached the couple confirmed my account. He'd seen them too, had scanned their key cards, had watched them vanish. The deck steward who'd verified Sky and Saint in their cabin maintained that he'd spoken with them and they'd been inside the whole time. We had 3 reliable witnesses describing contradictory realities and no way to reconcile the accounts. The operations manager decided to contact Sky and Saint directly and ask them about their movements that day. When security went to their cabin, they found both passengers inside, exactly as the deck steward had reported. Sky and Saint said they'd returned from shore around 10 a.m., had been in their cabin since then, and hadn't left. They showed their keycard scan history on the ship's app, which confirmed they'd scanned back on board at 9:53 a.m. from Tender 4 and hadn't scanned anywhere else since then. I showed them the security footage from the 11:15 tender arrival, where their distorted images appeared among the disembarking passengers. They watched it and insisted that wasn't them, that they'd already been on the ship by that time. I described the couple I'd seen in line at 2:30, detailed their appearance and clothing. Skye said yes, that was what she'd been wearing that morning, and Saint confirmed his outfit matched my description. But they swore they hadn't been at the tender platform in the afternoon. The captain was briefed on the situation and made the decision to classify it as an equipment malfunction with a key card scanning system, combined with possible security camera glitches. That explanation didn't satisfy me or the security officer who'd witnessed the same thing I had. But we were overruled. The incident was logged as a technical issue, and I was told not to discuss it with passengers or other crew members. When we sailed away from Grand Cayman that evening, our passenger count matched our manifest exactly. The head count discrepancy had somehow resolved itself. The 2 extra people who'd been counted earlier were gone from the totals, like they'd never been there. It ran a complete audit of the keycard system and found no errors, no glitches, no explanation for any of the anomalies. I requested a transfer to a different ship after that cruise. Holland America offered me what they called an early retirement package within a month, which was really a polite way of pushing me out. I'd spent 20 years in the Coast Guard with an exemplary record, and I'd been with Holland America for 7 years without any issues. But after reporting what I'd seen in Grand Cayman, I became a problem they wanted to solve by making me disappear. I still think about Skye and Saint, about seeing them in 2 places simultaneously, about their distorted images in security footage, and their physical presence that left no digital trace. I think about the passenger count that didn't add up and then mysteriously corrected itself. Mostly I think about how the systems we trust to track and protect thousands of people at sea can show us one reality while our eyes see another. And how when those realities conflict, the institutions we work for would rather dismiss the witnesses than investigate the impossibility. If you saw something that security cameras couldn't record, would you trust your eyes or the technology? Let me know in the comments. My name is Treasure, and I've worked in cruise ship entertainment for 9 years. I started as a backup dancer, worked my way up to lead performer, and eventually became entertainment director for Carnival Cruise Line. My job is to keep passengers happy, to create energy and excitement, to make sure every show runs smoothly and every guest feels like they're having the vacation of their dreams. I'm good at what I do because I genuinely love it. The performances, the crowds, the appliance when a show goes well. But something happened backstage on the Carnival Magic during a Western Caribbean cruise in November 2016 that broke through my professional enthusiasm and showed me that sometimes the stages we perform on have histories that refuse to stay buried. The Carnival Magic runs 7-day Western Caribbean routes out of Galveston, stopping in Jamaica, Grand Cayman, and Cozumel. The main theater where we perform is a beautiful venue. 3 levels of seating, professional lighting, and sound systems. A stage large enough for elaborate productions. I'd been working on the Magic for about 8 months when this happened, long enough to know the ship intimately and to have developed routines that made my job efficient. Every cruise followed the same entertainment schedule. Welcome show on embarkation night, game shows and deck parties during sea days, production shows on formal nights, farewell show on the last evening. The repetition was comforting, predictable, exactly what you want when managing a team of performers and technical crew. We were rehearsing for the week's welcome show on a Sunday afternoon. The ship had just left Galveston. Passengers were still getting settled, and the theater was empty except for my entertainment team. We had about 15 people involved in the production. Singers, dancers, the tech crew running lights and sound. I was on stage running through choreography with the performers when one of our technical guys, a sound engineer I'll call Marjorie, came out of the backstage area carrying an old VHS tape. She asked if anyone knew where it came from. She'd been organizing the storage room behind the tech booth, looking for some props we needed, and found this tape sitting on a shelf with equipment inventory. The tape was in a clear plastic case, and someone had written on the label in black marker, "Carnival Magic Welcome Show 1987. That didn't make sense because the Carnival Magic was built in 2011. There was no show from 1987 because the ship didn't exist yet. We figured it was probably from an older ship and had been mislabeled or misshelved, maybe brought over when crew transferred between vessels. Marjorie said we should watch it, partly out of curiosity and partly because it might be interesting to see how entertainment productions had evolved over the decades. I agreed, thinking it might be fun for the team to see vintage cruise ship performances. We took a break from rehearsal, and Marjorie set up one of the old VHS players we kept in storage for converting archived footage. She connected it to the theater's projection system, and we all settled into the audience seats to watch. The tape started with static, then cleared to show a stage that looked exactly like our stage. Same dimensions, same red curtains, same configuration. The video quality was typical of 1987, slightly grainy but clear enough. The welcome show began with music and performers coming on stage. The choreography was dated. The costumes had that 80s style. Big hair and bright colors. But the production quality was decent. We watched for maybe 5 minutes, some of my team laughing at the retro styling, others commenting on how some of the moves were similar to what we still used. Then something happened in the video that made everyone go quiet. The choreography we were watching was identical to the routine I'd just been teaching my team. Not similar, not inspired by, but exactly the same. The formation changes, the timing, the specific 8-count sequences. Everything matched what I'd created for this week's show. I designed this choreography myself over the past month, pulling from various influences and building something I thought was original. But here it was on a tape supposedly from 1987, being performed by dancers in an era before I was even born. Marjorie paused the video, and we all sat there processing what we'd seen. One of the dancers suggested maybe I'd unconsciously remembered this choreography from somewhere else. That perhaps I'd seen a similar routine years ago, and it had influenced my work without me realizing it. But I'd been very deliberate about creating something new, and the chances of accidentally recreating someone else's work, move for move, seemed impossible. We kept watching. The video continued through the entire welcome show, and I recognized everything. The song selections, the costume changes, the transitions between segments, all of it matched the show I'd planned for this week. When the finale started, I knew what was coming before it happened on screen. The performers arranged themselves in the exact formation I'd designed, did the exact final sequence I'd choreographed, and held the exact ending pose I'd chosen. Then something happened that made my skin crawl. All the performers on screen, maybe 20 people in total, stopped mid-performance. They didn't finish the routine, didn't bow, didn't move into the rehearsed ending. They just stopped, frozen in their positions, and slowly turned to face the camera. All of them, simultaneously, staring directly at the lens with blank expressions. The music continued playing, but the performers stood motionless, staring. The image held for maybe 10 seconds, though it felt much longer. Then the video cut to static, and through the static we could hear audio. It sounded like someone screaming a name. The audio was distorted, hard to make out clearly, but it sounded like they were screaming treasure. My name. over and over, buried in the static. Marjorie immediately stopped the playback. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Finally, one of the singers asked if we'd all heard the same thing, if that audio had actually said my name. Several people confirmed they'd heard it too. Marjorie rewound the tape to replay that section, but when she pressed play, the ending was different. This time the performers finished their routine normally, took their bows, and the video ended with applause. No frozen stare, no static, no screaming. Just a normal show ending. We watched it 3 more times, and each time it played normally. The performers finished their choreography, the show ended, the tape went to static without any audio anomalies. But I knew what I'd seen the first time, and my team confirmed it. We'd all witnessed those performers stop and stare, all heard the screaming in the static. Marjorie suggested maybe it was a glitch in the old tape, that decades-old VHS recordings could degrade and create strange artifacts. That explanation made sense for the visual distortion, but it didn't explain why the audio had seemed to say my name specifically. I took the tape and brought it to my cabin after rehearsal. I had an old laptop with a VHS converter that I'd bought years ago for digitizing family videos. I wanted to capture the footage and examine it more carefully, frame by frame if necessary, to understand what we'd seen. I connected the VHS player and started the digitization process, letting the entire tape play through while recording it to my computer. This time, watching alone in my cabin, the video showed something different. The show proceeded normally until about 3 minutes before the end, and then I noticed something in the background. The theater in the video looked exactly like our theater, but the details were slightly wrong. The exit signs were in different positions. The ceiling fixtures weren't quite the same style. And most disturbing, the architecture seemed newer than it should have been for a 1987 recording. The theater looked modern, like it had been designed recently, not like a 30-year-old venue. I paused the video and examined the performers more carefully. They all looked professional, well-rehearsed, properly costumed. But as I studied their faces, I started recognizing them. Not as people I knew personally, but as people who looked remarkably similar to my current team. One dancer had the same facial structure as Sewell, one of my lead performers. Another looked almost identical to Luella, my assistant director. The resemblance was too strong to be coincidental, like I was watching relatives or doppelgangers of my current crew. Then I noticed my own face. One of the performers in the background, barely visible on the left side of the stage, looked exactly like me. Same hairstyle I currently wore, same build, same facial features. I was looking at myself performing in a video from 1987, 13 years before I was born. I took screenshots of the frame, zoomed in on the face, compared it to recent photos of myself. The resemblance wasn't approximate or coincidental. It was me. The exact same person I saw in the mirror every morning was dancing on that stage in footage that should have been recorded before I existed. I called Marjorie to my cabin and showed her the digitized footage. She saw what I was seeing, confirmed that the performers looked like our current team, confirmed that one of them looked exactly like me. We went through the video frame by frame, and we found other anomalies. In one scene, the theater's digital display screens showed a date. November 14th, 2016. That was tomorrow's date, not 1987. In another scene, a crew member visible in the wings was wearing a modern carnival uniform, the current design that had only been introduced in 2015. We realized the tape wasn't from 1987. It couldn't be. Everything about it suggested it was recent, maybe even filmed on this ship, in this theater. But that raised an even more disturbing question. Who had filmed my show before I'd performed it? And why had they labeled it 1987? I checked the storage room where Marjorie had found the tape, looking for other materials or any indication of who might have left it there. The room was locked, accessible only to entertainment staff with proper key cards. I checked the access log on my tablet, and nobody had entered that storage room in the past week except Marjorie and me. I decided to check the theater itself for recording equipment. Maybe someone had set up cameras and recorded one of our previous shows, then edited it to look vintage. But we hadn't performed this specific welcome show yet. This was a new production I designed for this week's cruise, never performed before. I'd only finished the choreography 2 weeks ago, and we'd only started rehearsing it 3 days ago. There was no previous performance to have recorded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the video, about seeing my own face in footage that couldn't exist, about the performers who looked like my team. Around 2 in the morning, I got dressed and went to the theater. The venue was empty and dark, except for the emergency lighting. I walked onto the stage and stood in the center, looking out at the empty seats. The space felt different at night, less energetic, almost hollow. I went backstage to the technical booth and found the storage room where the tape had been discovered. I searched more thoroughly this time, moving equipment, checking behind shelves, looking for anything else unusual. That's when I found the documentation. There was a folder tucked behind some old lighting fixtures, and inside were production notes for welcome shows dating back to 2012 when the ship first entered service. I flipped through them looking for any mention of the show I'd designed, and I found something that stopped my heart. There were notes from November 2016, the current month, describing my show in complete detail. Not rough ideas or preliminary concepts, but complete descriptions of choreography, costume designs, song selections, everything exactly as I'd created it. The notes were written in handwriting I didn't recognize, dated 2 weeks before I'd started designing the show. Someone had documented my entire production before I'd thought of it. I brought this evidence to my supervisor the next morning and explained everything. The tape, the digitized footage, the production notes that predated my work. He listened carefully, watched some of the video, examined the documentation. Then he told me something that made everything worse. The theater on the Carnival Magic had been experiencing technical issues since the ship was built. Multiple entertainment directors before me had reported strange occurrences. Recordings that shouldn't exist, equipment that operated on its own, performances that crew members swore they'd seen but that had no official record. He said the company knew about it, but couldn't explain it, and didn't want passengers or crew to feel uncomfortable. So they'd classified it as technical glitches and equipment malfunctions. He advised me to destroy the tape and the documentation, to not mention it to my team, and to continue with the show as planned. He said if I couldn't do that, they would find someone else who could, and my contract might not be renewed. I performed that welcome show 2 nights later. Everything went exactly as planned. The choreography I'd created, the routines I'd taught my team, the production I'd designed. The passengers loved it, gave us a standing ovation, came up afterward to tell me how much they enjoyed the performance. And the whole time I was on that stage, I kept thinking about the video, about watching myself perform this exact show in footage labeled 1987, about the production notes written before I'd created the production. I finished that contract and requested a transfer to a different ship. Carnival offered me a position on one of their Alaska vessels, and I took it immediately. I've been working northern routes for the past 3 years, and I've never experienced anything like what happened on the Magic. But I kept copies of everything before I destroyed the originals like my supervisor wanted. The digitized video, the screenshots, the production notes, all backed up on drives that I've hidden away. Sometimes I wonder about the entertainment directors who worked on the magic before me, whether they saw their own faces in impossible footage, whether they found documentation of shows they hadn't yet created. I wonder if the person who comes after me will find a tape labeled with a date from before the ship existed, will watch themselves perform routines they're still designing, will realize that whatever exists in that theater isn't bound by normal time. Have you ever created something only to discover it already existed somewhere else? Tell me your story in the comments. My name is Zaria, and for 19 years, I served as a navigation officer in the maritime industry before what happened on the oasis of the seas ended my career at sea. I held the position of second officer on the bridge, responsible for chart work, passage planning, and standing watch during the critical overnight hours when most passengers sleep and the ship moves through darkness, guided only by instruments and the expertise of the watch team. I've navigated through storms, heavy traffic, technical failures, and countless routine nights where nothing remarkable happened except the steady progress of a massive vessel moving thousands of people safely across the ocean. But on one night in August 2015, sailing between Puerto Rico and St. Thomas, I witnessed something that violated every principle of physics, navigation, and reality that I'd built my career upon. The Oasis of the Seas is one of the largest cruise ships in the world, over 1,000 feet long, capable of carrying more than 6,000 passengers. When you're responsible for navigating something that size, you don't take chances. Every decision is calculated, every course correction is logged, every observation is documented. The bridge is equipped with redundant systems for everything critical: radar, GPS, AIS transponders, communication equipment. We have backups for the backups because at sea, equipment failure can mean disaster. I was on watch from midnight to 4 a.m., which is called the graveyard shift for obvious reasons. It's the quietest time on the ship, when most passengers are asleep and the bridge crew operates with minimal staff. That night, it was just me, a helmsman, and a junior officer doing chart work. The weather was clear, seas were calm, visibility was excellent. We were following a standard route that Royal Caribbean ships had used thousands of times, traveling through open water between the islands with no unusual traffic or hazards. At 2:17 a.m., our radar picked up a contact. That's standard terminology for another vessel detected by our systems. The contact appeared approximately 8 nautical miles off our starboard side, traveling on a parallel course at what appeared to be similar speed. I noted it in the log and continued monitoring. In these waters, it's common to encounter other cruise ships, cargo vessels, or local traffic, so a single contact wasn't concerning as long as it maintained safe distance. But as I watched the radar display over the next few minutes, something seemed wrong. The contact was matching our course exactly, not just traveling in the same general direction, but mirroring every aspect of our movement. When I adjusted our heading 2 degrees to port as part of our planned route, the contact adjusted identically. When I reduced our speed by half a knot due to a minor engine efficiency adjustment, the contact reduced speed by the same amount. The synchronization was too precise to be coincidental. I switched on the AIS overlay, which displays identification information broadcast by other vessels. Modern ships are required to transmit their identity, position, course, and speed continuously, so that other vessels can identify them and avoid collisions. The contact showed up on AIS, but the information it transmitted made my stomach tighten. The vessel identification read, "Oasis of the Seas, Royal Caribbean," same name as our ship. The transmitted position data showed it was exactly 8 nautical miles off our starboard side. The course and speed data matched ours perfectly. I called the junior officer over to verify what I was seeing. He looked at the displays and confirmed everything. Radar contact, AIS transmission, all showing another vessel with our ship's identity running parallel to us. He suggested it might be a technical error, maybe a ghost echo on the radar caused by atmospheric conditions, or perhaps another ship with a malfunctioning AIS transmitter broadcasting incorrect information. Those explanations were plausible, but they didn't account for the perfect synchronization of movement. I stepped out onto the bridge wing to get a visual confirmation. It was a clear night, nearly full moon, excellent visibility across the water. I looked toward the starboard side where the contact should be visible at 8 nautical miles. At that distance with good conditions, you should be able to see the lights of a ship the size of the Oasis. And I could. There was a vessel there, running lights clearly visible, silhouette just barely distinguishable against the dark water. The shape looked wrong, though. Too large for the distance, and the light configuration seemed too familiar. I went back inside and grabbed the binoculars, then returned to the bridge wing. Through the binoculars, I could see the other vessel more clearly, and what I saw made me question my own perception. The ship's profile was identical to ours. The distinctive design of the Oasis-class vessels is unmistakable. The split superstructure, the forward-facing pool area, the specific arrangement of decks and balconies. I was looking at another Oasis of the seas running parallel to us at exactly the same speed. I radioed down to the duty officer and reported the situation, requesting that someone verify our AIS transmission wasn't malfunctioning. If our transponder was broadcasting incorrectly, it might explain why we were seeing our own information appear on a different vessel. The duty officer confirmed within 5 minutes that our AIS was functioning perfectly and transmitting accurate data. Our transponder was working fine, which meant the contact we were tracking was something else. I attempted radio communication on VHF channel 16, which is the International Hailing and Distress frequency. I called out to the vessel 8 miles off our starboard side, identifying ourselves and requesting identification from them. No response. I tried again, using different phrasings, calling specifically to the vessel showing as Oasis of the Seas on AIS. Nothing but silence, not even static or interference, just empty carrier wave. The helmsman reported that he was getting unusual feedback from the autopilot system. The ship's automated steering was making micro-adjustments more frequently than normal, as if it was compensating for some external influence on our course. I checked our GPS position and compared it to our dead reckoning calculations. Everything matched perfectly. We were exactly where we should be, following our planned route precisely. But the autopilot was behaving like something was pulling us off course, even though no such deviation appeared in any of our navigation systems. I decided to test something. I took manual control from the autopilot and altered our course 5 degrees to starboard, directly toward the contact. Standard collision avoidance procedures would have us turn away from another vessel, but I wanted to see how it would respond. As I executed the turn, I watched the radar. The contact turned 5 degrees to starboard simultaneously. Not after a delay, not in reaction to our movement, but at the exact same instant. The two vessels turned together like we were connected by an invisible beam. I brought us back to our original course, and the contact matched that movement too. The junior officer suggested we call the captain and report this situation, as it had gone beyond routine watch concerns. I agreed and made the call. The captain arrived on the bridge within 6 minutes, along with the staff captain who served as his second in command. I briefed them both on everything we'd observed: the radar contact, the AIS transmission showing our ship's identity, the visual confirmation of a vessel matching our profile, the synchronized movements, the lack of radio response. The captain verified everything himself, checking the displays, looking through the binoculars, attempting radio contact. He ordered a course change of 10 degrees to port and a speed reduction of 3 knots. We executed the maneuver, and the contact matched us perfectly. Same turn, same speed reduction, same timing. The captain's expression shifted from skeptical to deeply concerned. He ordered the bridge team to begin documenting everything. Screenshots of radar and AIS displays, entries in the ship's log with precise timestamps, photos of the visual contact. At 2:53 a.m., the captain decided to alter our route significantly. He ordered a 40-degree turn to starboard, directly toward the contact, accelerating to maximum sustainable speed. This was a dramatic maneuver for a ship this size, something we'd only do in an emergency or to avoid collision. The idea was to force a reaction from the other vessel, to break whatever synchronization we were experiencing. As we began the turn, I watched the radar intensely. The contact started to turn with us, matching our heading change degree for degree. Then something happened that made everyone on the bridge go silent. As we continued the turn and closed the distance, the radar contact began to blur, not fade or disappear cleanly, but blur like an image going out of focus. The AIS signal became intermittent, cutting in and out with increasing frequency. Through the binoculars, the visual image of the other ship seemed to shimmer, like heat distortion over pavement in summer, even though we were looking across cool ocean water in the middle of the night. At 2:58 a.m., the contact vanished. Not gradually, not piece by piece, but instantaneously. One moment it was there on radar, on AIS, visible through binoculars, and the next moment it was completely gone. Every system showed empty ocean where the contact had been. The radar sweep showed nothing. The AIS display showed no vessels in our vicinity. Looking through binoculars revealed only dark water and empty horizon. The captain immediately contacted the Coast Guard via satellite communication and reported the incident. He provided our position coordinates, described what we'd observed, and requested information about any other vessels that might have been in our area. The Coast Guard checked their traffic databases and confirmed that no other vessels had been operating in that section of ocean at that time. They had no explanation for what we'd observed. We reviewed all our instrument recordings, and everything we'd witnessed was documented in the data. The radar had tracked a solid contact for 41 minutes. The AIS had received transmissions showing another vessel with our identity. The autopilot logs showed the micro-adjustments it had made, as if responding to some external force. The ship's log contained detailed entries with timestamps and observations from multiple bridge officers. We had evidence that something had happened, but no explanation for what that something was. The captain filed a formal incident report with Royal Caribbean corporate offices and with the appropriate maritime authorities. The report contained all our documentation: radar recordings, AIS logs, photos, witness statements from everyone on the bridge. He made it clear in his report that this was not equipment malfunction or human error, that multiple independent systems had tracked the same phenomenon, that multiple trained officers had observed it both instrumentally and visually. Within a week of that voyage ending, I received notification that I was being reassigned. Not terminated, not disciplined, but moved from the Oasis to a cargo ship operation in the North Atlantic. The reassignment was presented as a lateral move, an opportunity for different experience. But I understood what it actually meant. I'd been involved in an incident that Royal Caribbean wanted to contain, and removing me from their passenger ship operations was part of that containment. The captain and the junior officer, who'd witnessed everything with me, were also reassigned within the following month. The captain was offered what they called early retirement with full benefits, which he accepted. The junior officer was moved to shore-based operations. The helmsman, who'd reported the autopilot anomalies, was transferred to a different vessel. Everyone who'd been on the bridge that night was quietly dispersed to different positions where we wouldn't be working together or discussing the incident. I learned later through informal channels that the incident report was classified as instrument malfunction and filed away without further investigation. The official record stated that multiple navigation systems experienced temporary glitches due to atmospheric interference, causing false radar returns and AIS signal corruption. The visual observation was attributed to misidentification of a distant vessel combined with optical illusion from moonlight on water. Every aspect of what we'd witnessed was explained away as technical error or human mistake. I worked in cargo ship navigation for another 2 years before leaving maritime service entirely. The work was fine. The pay was adequate. But something had changed for me after that night on the Oasis. I couldn't look at navigation instruments the same way, couldn't trust the technology with the same confidence, couldn't accept that the ocean we thought we understood was actually as mapped and measured as our charts suggested. I still have copies of the documentation from that night, photos I took with my personal phone before we were asked to delete official records. I have screenshots showing 2 vessels with the same identity in the same ocean at the same time. I have log entries describing synchronized movements that violated probability and physics. I have the timestamp showing exactly when everything vanished. 2:58 a.m. Coordinates 18.4 degrees north, 65.2 degrees west, between Puerto Rico and St. Thomas. The Oasis of the Seas still operates that route regularly. Thousands of passengers book those Caribbean cruises every week, completely unaware that the bridge officers navigating their ship once tracked something impossible running parallel to them for 41 minutes before it disappeared like it had never existed. They don't know that the instruments they trust to keep them safe once showed them a reflection of their own vessel in a place where no vessel should have been. I wonder sometimes if it's still happening. If bridge officers on the Oasis still occasionally pick up that contact on radar, still see the AIS showing their own ship's identity 8 miles to starboard, still watch through binoculars as something that looks exactly like them keeps perfect pace through the darkness. I wonder if they report it. Or if they've learned, like I did, that some observations are better left unrecorded, some phenomena are better left unexplained, some nights at sea are better forgotten than investigated. If you were navigating a ship and your instruments showed an impossible duplicate of your own vessel, would you report it or stay silent? Let me know in the comments what you'd do. That's all 10 mysteries from the Caribbean Sea. Stories that cruise lines don't want you to hear and crew members rarely discuss. These accounts come from real people who witness things that challenge their understanding of reality at sea. If these stories made you think twice about your next cruise, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because at Mr. Nightveil, we explore the darkness that hides in plain sight. The ocean keeps its secrets, but we're here to bring them into the light. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember that sometimes the scariest mysteries are the ones that happen in places designed for relaxation and fun.